2026. A couple of things to look forward to. 419. 419 is the anniversary of the Burning Man, Dave Koresh, who was incinerated at the age of 33 in Waco, which inspired the terror attack on that same date, 419, by Timothy McVeigh, who was motivated, of course, by the Koresh killing the Branch Davidians, but also by the book Turner Diaries. And then on the anniversary of this immolation of Koresh, you also had Maxwell Israelo setting himself on fire outside the Trump courthouse with a manifesto about how Trump and Clinton were on the same team, and that ultimately it's the fascists, the rich oligarchs versus the people, which really ties into everything else that we've been discussing here. And by the way, the quality of the manifestos have always been bad, but now it's like they're lazy. I think they're using Chat GPT. All right, so what else are we talking about? Oh yeah, so 419. And that's going to be part of the Great Deconstruction, is where we start correlating the various simulated staged events just to demonstrate how they all exist within the same fictional universe. And I'm not in their fictional universe. I'm not in fictive level 1. If you've seen it, Black Mirror season 6 has an episode where a character finds out that her likeness has been used for movie characters without her permission, that her life has been turned into a Netflix show, only the character that plays her is Selma Hayek. And it's explained to her that she lives in fictive level 1. So fictive level 1 is the idea that she's in a partial simulation. I mean, I'm not going to give you a full spoiler on the episode, but the public lives in fictive level 1. So, for example, if you buy into any of the world views that are centered around a scapegoat who is blamed for a bunch of stuff that didn't really happen. So and it's kind of coded in a certain way where like woke left is anti-white and anti-male, woke right is anti-female and anti-Semite, anti-non-white. So they're kind of like the anti-racists and the racists. They're kind of against each other in fictive level 1 because their various scapegoat scenarios are predicated upon these events being real. So if you think that 9/11 was real as presented and that the death toll was correct, well, then who do you blame for that? Well, if you're a mainstreamer, obviously you blame Iran, you blame Saudi Arabia, you blame Islam, or you blame possibly Bush. Or if you're far right, you blame Israel. But in either instance, you're finding somebody to blame for this mass casualty event. But what if the mass casualty event was a simulation? Is there a point to blaming anybody? And that's where I find this divergence between the off-world stage perspective and the far woke right. And at this point, anybody who is, Antifa or Groyper just needs to recognize that they're operating within a fictional universe. And so I've decided that I'm no longer going to tolerate Antifa in our Discord server. And I'm not trying to be a censor here, but if your whole worldview is based on, blaming a certain segment of the population for all the world's ills, then, go be part of that. It's a different movement. We're not really about that. So woke left Antifa are banned on site. And in order to be fair, we're also banning woke right. So anyone espousing woke right views can't sit with us. And the reason why is that we're trying to specifically segregate from the world stage. The off-world stage position doesn't allow us to entertain mainstream points of view as though they're valid. And it would be a double standard for us to accept people who are alt media and reject the people who are mainstream, or to accept the woke right but reject the woke left. And what I'm saying here is that if you're a world stager, then that's where you belong. If you can't leave your internalized, imposed Truman Show behind, if you can't leave the fake world behind, then you have no business attempting to be an off-world stage media critic, because it would undermine all of your cherished beliefs or your need for a scapegoat. Because there are people who claim that they're oppressed, and it's like, well, who's oppressing you? It depends on what side of the political spectrum that you're on. The whole thing, again, is premised upon the fake history being real. And if that's your point of view, well, then your starting point is just wrong. And we are working on a different foundation than that. And it's critical that we don't let them blend in. Like, we don't let the Mandela affected hang out with us. Why? Well, because we are trying to discern objective reality from hyper reality, where the fakeries fuse with real. And if we're going to be objective, we have to agree that reality is objective. But if your starting point is no, reality changes every day and it alters things, well, then you're not in a position to say that news is fake in any nuanced way. If you think reality is fake, then how can news be fake? News can't be fake unless it diverges from something that is real. And if you can't say which one is objectively true, if you can't even define objective reality, if you think it's shifty, then what are you doing paying attention to the news anyway? If I thought reality was shifting and subjective, I would not be trying to hold the news accountable to a standard that doesn't exist. So again, it's nothing personal, but if you get banned, it's probably for that reason, and it's for your own good, because you are better served fighting the fight that you actually care about instead of hanging out with a bunch of skeptics. Same thing with overtly religious people. If you're very religious, why are you going to hang out with someone like me who has a problem with your God and your religion? We're joined by Paradoxy Moronics, P. Trippa, Kevin Mooring, King Ravana says, collect. Oh, yeah, Maxwell is Rello. I should make a collector card for him as well. The PSYOP trading cards are going into production next week. Joined by Polecat, AutoHoaxer GTFO, Exploring Again, and Rocky USA. Thanks for joining. I sent out a live notification, and if you can't stay up tonight, this one will be posted in the archives. I know we haven't had archives posted in like a month, but that's fine. It's going to be fixed starting tonight. And we are going to be on a regular schedule. I'm moving down to part-time, and I'm going to open up specific days so we can do the open phones system. And I think if we maintain the same hour, and we'll fine tune it, we'll find out when we get peak numbers, but we'll see it grow. And we will be doing call-driven shows where there's a specific topic we want people to call in on. So it's not just going to be a platform for people to advocate whatever their particular current thing is. I mean, we're open to open topics, but we want to have some kind of a focus, which also means that we're going to limit call lengths to 5 minutes, maybe 10. If they stay on topic, maybe longer, but that's about it. We have to be cognizant of the point that to the fact that we're trying to get data points from random points of view that we don't all share. I mean, this is a very vast puzzle, and it will take a lot of people from different points of view to put it together. And we need to be also bringing back the idea of the press club. The reason we issued press passes was so that we could be unlockdownable, and we could fact check or compare and reality test the claims of the media with what we were actually experiencing. And we want to bring that back. And one of the things that makes somebody a legitimate reporter is that they're actually reporting, and calling in could be considered reporting from the field, from the front lines of the war. I'm going to go through my Twitter to see what is relevant right now. I've been relying on X, I call it Twitter, on X, as a way of bookmarking things that I think are worthy of your attention. And if I have anything on Twitter, you can bet we're going to talk about it. So it's a good way to get an idea of what we're going to talk about that night. I'll post some topics. So let's start with, oh yeah, there's a lot of truther bait. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories that are posted out there, I think, just to make skeptics look dumb. And a lot of people fall for this stuff where they search the name of the astronaut, Christina Koch, and then they found a similar name in the Mad Max Furiosa, which is a really good movie. And they suggested, oh, she was an actor. And they did the same thing for the other guy as well. Well, neither of these are true. But people are making these claims because they get a lot of clicks on TikTok from credulous alt media consumers. And so you have no business criticizing mainstreamers as being brainwashed if you're just automatically, uncritically accepting what you get from alt media. So these types of claims are thrown around as, oh, this is why NASA's a big psyop production company and not a real space agency. And then these conspiracy theories are automatically corrected. So in other words, I don't think it's just poor research or merely engagement bait, because if you really wanted to inform people, there's plenty of stuff there. You don't need to make stuff up. I think this is sabotage. I think it's sabotage. And it's set up so that if you don't vet something from your own side, they're going to trip you up. And this is how controlled opposition works. Every major influencer in the conspiracy realm in Trutherville, all the big channels are controlled op. They're propaganda disseminators who are basically sending out the state approved version of conspiracies. And as a rule, you could actually, I would assert, and you could just act as though this is true, that every single conspiracy theory out there is actually a controlled opposition talking point. Because what we're doing isn't conspiracy theorizing. We are describing events that are portrayed as real, but are actually staged productions by the government in collusion with media, news, and with entertainment. It's not a conspiracy theory. The meta script, the superimposed series of fake events that are merged with our lived timeline, that become part of our bent history, that's not a conspiracy theory. We're describing how media actually works and how monolithic it is. The conspiracy theories are basically part of the mainstream infrastructure. I just call it alt programming. So don't fall for any of that stuff. And that's what X mostly is. Mostly X consists of what I call controlled opposition talking points. And these things are presented as anti-establishment. It's like, no, actually the establishment controls both sides. It's a duopoly. Tweet from Discussing Film. Steven Spielberg has revealed that the entire third act of Disclosure Day is being kept out of the marketing. So there's a lot of hype regarding this movie, and I don't know if the recent talks about alien disclosures are just promoting the film or if it was just a coincidence, but it seems to me that this nothing burger from the Pentagon, because they've said that they're not covering anything up, has all just been to hype up this movie. And the movie screen is very much the Overton window these days. Like, nobody was talking about aliens until Steven Spielberg's trailer dropped. Now, I'm getting back to conspiracy theories. Another thing, too, is that you think of conspiracy theories as being the alternative media, and the mainstream isn't. And this is a arbitrary distinction. The mainstream narratives are basically conspiracy theories, just as much as the controlled opposition talking points are, but they're given the stamp of approval. So the extremes are based around these scapegoat narratives. And you see it very pronouncedly on the left with Antifa and they're blaming of the world's problems and oppression and the destruction of the climate on what they would describe as whiteness or systemic racism, the West. Like there's this idea that that's the fundamental thing, and this is essentially a conspiracy theory. And the right, as you go far on the right, has a mirror version of it, but they just blame, of course, the non-whites, Israel, but it's the same story. It's critical consciousness. Wokeism is called critical consciousness. And what this means is they have been awakened to how things really work and to their hidden oppression and the hidden oppressor. It's not obvious to the people who are still asleep. So the mainstream on each side are considered to be essentially asleep unless you've been given this awakening. The red pill truth movement is a form of critical consciousness or wokeism. I call it red pill woke. And it means that you've taken the red pill like Neo, and now you see all the conspiracies. Now, the thing is, all of these conspiracies eventually point to Israel, just as all of the leftist scapegoating is built around whiteness. So you have these twin or mirror paradigms that both offer a full worldview, and you can participate in it, and they're coexisting, even though you can't really say that both are true. But there's this interesting just split, the bifurcation that I talk about, where the contradiction isn't really even ever reconciled. And I find it really fascinating how the political horseshoe theory actually does fairly well describe the people as you get closer to the fringes. So my point here, though, is this idea of critical consciousness and woke is really a misnomer, because to be woke is actually to go deeper into the programming. So to me, it's more like going from dreaming to these nightmare scenarios. So the dreamers and those having these nightmares are all contained in the dream world, the merging of real and fake, which you would call the hyper reality. Now, I'm outside of that box looking in. I'm looking at the compartments. And when somebody is still plugged into it, it just reveals to me that, yeah, they're still programmed. They're still reactive. They're still reactive to whatever propaganda is targeting them. And it is highly targeted. And you can hear it in their assessment of the news, the way that they immediately fall for certain planted evidence. It's basically, this whole thing is a rigged game. But I call it the program because I call this the deprogram because it makes a distinction between those who are automatically going with the propaganda line of the day. That's the programmed. And the reason why the woke, both left and right, are so agitated is that for them, the more extreme view is more dire. Like the extreme environmentalists, like Extinction Rebellion, the world's about to end. And on the other side, it's white genocide. It's this notion of basically extinction, the destruction of traditional values. And moral panics are also weaponized. I would suggest that Pizzagate is a moral panic, satanic panic. The idea of the aliens being demons, this is supernaturalism. This is religiosity superimposed over politics. So that alone should discredit it. And I noticed too that, and I think this is all, planted propaganda. I noticed that there's a lot of phobias around AI also being demonic. And I've been asking, at what point did demons become real? And I thought it was a joke when Tucker Carlson brought it up and Candace Owens, but it's just become sort of solidified. So now apparently we as a society, we tolerate the belief in aliens and demons. Although the people who believe in aliens think that their view is superior to those who believe in demons. No, I'm sorry, these are equal superstitions. It's just that when it's dressed up like science fiction, people fall for it. Bob Lazar, this is one of the UFO UFO cult leaders, the troubled criminal past that debunks his claims of working on flying saucers. So apparently, a former wife of Bob Lazar there was something that's brought out in the research suggesting that maybe he wasn't really working on UFOs. And again, it's already been admitted that UFOlogy is a mythology created by the government to discredit anybody seeing classified craft. Pariah says AI is satanic, but the talking TV is fine. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea of demons, though, being admitted into the paradigm, to me, is just a further indicator of what I started saying a few years ago, that we're being transitioned into a new dark age. That the elimination, really, of any ability for us to tell the difference between real and fake, I mean, we're losing that capacity, is equivalent to undoing the Reformation in a way. Because if you think about it, the movable type press, the information being liberated from these monopolies was an equalizer, a leveler of the playing field, democratizing the means of producing written content, mass disseminating it, breaking up this stranglehold over knowledge, which of course gave leverage because the ignorance is used against the masses. And so you see the Enlightenment as the result of this, and then the internet comes out. You think, oh, this is sort of the same thing. All this information's getting out. We're all going to be enlightened in some way. We're all going to get caught up, and it's going to level the playing field. Not really, because what they've done in the meantime is that, sure, we can all read as many books as we want and publish whatever, freedom of speech, etc. But now we can no longer rely on our eyes to tell us what is real and fake. The fakery is indistinguishable. And that has significant implications, because when someone's lying to you, you can deconstruct it. You can notice certain tells, fallacies. So in other words, you can use your reason to deconstruct some lie that's being told to you, but if it's televised, if it's purely visual, you're not able to discern in the same way. And even if you're an expert in video editing, or if you work in AI yourself, it may not be apparent. In fact, most people fall for stuff. I've fallen for stuff. I've fallen for pretty bad stuff, like the clown fish the size of a whale. Like, I didn't even question it. So I'm just saying that that alone suggests a return of power to those behind media, and a wall of ignorance where people are reliant on the authorities to tell them what is real and fake. So that goes along with the idea of us being plunged into a dark age where now they're also admitting a lot of nonsense and superstitions. Like, I wonder, why hasn't any mainstream source ever seriously debunked the Mandela effect? No, they talk about it, but they leave it open. Like, it's mysterious, but it's just a conspiracy. They sort of downplay it, but they don't just eliminate it and explain how it works. The mind fuckery, the gaslighting, the interrogator bias, the retroactive interference with someone's memories. They don't actually deconstruct it. And that makes me think they want these things to promulgate. They want you to be gaslightable, and they don't want you to have the ability to block any of their mind viruses. And I said this before, that your indoctrination process, it's designed to give you mind aids. It's designed to put holes in your mental immune system so you fall for stuff. They need you to be susceptible to mind viruses. And I do believe in mind viruses. And to me, a mind virus is simply a meme, an idea, or a concept that one catches that is false, but that one comes to believe through a passive acceptance of it, the non-critical acceptance. Because that's what I'm talking about. Mental immune system refers to the critical barrier between yourself and these random beliefs and ideas that are being thrown around. And people are conditioned, of course, to accept these things uncritically from their chosen sources. Outsourcing. And in my view, that is something that they don't want to change. And the more they introduce superstitions like UFOs and demons into just regular everyday talk, I think the wider these gaps in the immune system are becoming. So they want us to believe anything. And I think the barrier to what they can introduce into our hyper reality is our gullibility. Like, how gullible are we? And how much more gullible can we get? And if anything, the MAGA movement, the JFK cult, that should tell us something. That people are able to go into these entirely parallel universes. It's like these breakaway universes. And it's reinforced through, of course, interaction with agents and propagandists and social media. Just cults within cults. And you could argue, too, that the mainstream worldview is itself a cult. And I often describe the pageantry of NASA as being, well, simply that space exploration, space utopianism, becoming a multi-planetary species, and all this. I think a lot of this is more or less like religious in a sense. It's not scientific. There's a point where science becomes science fiction and nobody seems to notice. But again, I'm just pointing out that there's no serious thinking in conspiracyville, and anything and everything goes. That's why I was so critical of the Jim Carrey thing. Like, I'm fine with conspiratainment, but if you're going to run like with the serious claim that Jim Carrey was sacrificed by the Illuminati and replaced by a poorly matched clone, like, that's a huge story. And after a week, people get bored of it. Nobody talks about it. So to me, what that really suggests is that they're not serious. Like, I'm convinced that they're not serious. And by not serious, I mean they're not actually trying to make a knowledge claim. They're trying to get clicks and attention. But my point of it is, again, this think tank is engaged in something a little more serious and objective, which doesn't mean it's not fun. Maybe it's not as conspirataining. I think it is. I think we're unveiling the meta conspiracy. Like, oh, hey, look, alternative media free thinkers, you're also brainwashed. And a lot of them don't want to hear it. And one of the concepts that I've been promulgating for years before AI started using it, before all these AI companies, is guard railing. How they put guardrails in AI to steer it away from certain sensitive topics or outcomes in what it's going to present to you. And I've used the term guardrails to describe conspiracy theories that prevent people from going too far and finding out that the conspiracy theory itself is a planted line. Autohooks says, do you think it's an unprovable mind virus that people's goal in life should be to escape reincarnating back here? You know, I don't really know. I mean, the reincarnation thing, like, I might be for it. I mean, I kind of don't like the idea that there's a loss of continuity of consciousness between lives. I haven't remembered any past lives. But no, I mean, I enjoy this. I wish it would last longer. You know, it'd be nice. A lot of things would be nice, I guess. But as far as reincarnation goes, I'm not really opposed to it, just depending on whether or not I have a voice in it. Like, could I be downgraded? Is there any predestination? You know, and it depends on where. Like, what if I was like, I don't want to be born like in Utah or something. Like, I don't want to be a Mormon. I don't want to be a religious fanatic in some place. I'm not really sure where I'd want to be. But I don't know. Is reincarnation real? And many people believe that it is real, but you should try to avoid it. And that's that might be smart. Like, how about you wait? But if you opt out, can you ever opt back in if you change your mind? So I don't know. It's a big decision, but I haven't really given it that much thought. I mean, other than reincarnation is kind of built into a lot of the religious esoteric symbolism we see in some of these psyops, along with the heavy Gnostic subtext present in so many films and so many depictions of archons. So you can note how many movies do appropriate a lot of Christian iconography and merge it with their storylines. The Christification of so many characters and actors, it's actually quite extensive. And I think that's because the media does constitute a one world church. It is our one world religion. And this one world religion is an amalgamation of all the other ones. So it just appropriates everything. But not only does it appropriate the mainstream Christian mythos, but it also appropriates the Gnostic alternative or the Gnostic spin on things. So it takes from all sources. Now, I have heard of something called serial reincarnation. I mean, this is just obscure. It's from a grimoire I found, a text on chaos magic. And it talked about this thing. It reminds me of the Moonchild. Are you familiar with the Moonchild? It's one of Crowley's books. The Babylon Working represented this, occult eugenics, the concept of what they call sex magic, which means that instead of producing a human baby, you're elevating consciousness and using that creative or that created spark. You're using that energetic exchange to create something that is incorporeal. Like, in other words, like summoning a demon, but not really summoning something, but creating something, and a center of consciousness. So this idea is that you could actually summon such a thing in what they call the Babylon Working and implant it or have it possess a gestating baby. So like your baby could also have the benefit of being possessed its entire life by some angelic force that you summoned through Enochian sex magic. Like, this is what they actually believe in some of these cults. The idea here again is that the child, the yet to be born child, could be infused with some external entity. And that's, again, the Babylon Working. If you remember, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and Marjorie Cameron, they weren't trying to create a physical baby. She wasn't trying to have a baby. They said they were incarnating the spirit of the Antichrist. Although some say the timing of it would suggest it probably landed in Trump. This would have been the blood moon, 1946, June 11th-ish was his birthday. So it was like 3 months before that. But anyway, this thing I came across in serial reincarnation, it was called the red rite. And the idea was that you could coordinate a transfer of consciousness, which is something I hear about more and more, about the digital upload of your consciousness. But this article, this book, this essay described this idea that you could, or one could, have their consciousness transferred into a fetus, and that when you're born, there would be measures taken to essentially at some point re-educate and remind you of who you were. And it's called the red rite because it actually, I mean, this again, it's probably pure fantasy, but the idea here is that one does it near the end of their life, and that there's some way of, again, making that soul transfer. It sounds like science fiction or horror, to be honest. But if you did it right and you did retain your previous self, then that would be a form of immortality through serial reincarnation instead of a series of disparate lives that are disconnected from one another. It would give you an unfair advantage. Again, how would you know if any of this is true? Although I did hear this podcast the other day that had these disturbing notions of the elite being a bunch of immortals, more or less, in this way that somehow does involve soul transfers. And I've seen a few horror movies that dealt with this theme of soul transfer, displacement, the idea of one achieving immortality through essentially the theft of, bodies. I mean, that's a horrifying prospect. And David Icke, in his book Children of the Matrix, wrote about this idea that people who have, quote, reptilian in their bloodlines can activate the reptilian DNA through certain ceremonies and magic ceremonies, like occult ceremonies, that would somehow allow this other aspect of themselves in their blood to take over. And he suggested that when you tap into this, you become more useful to the system and you get elevated in your life. So the idea of selling your soul, he describes, is actually accurate. That you sell it in a sense, but when you finally do make this deal, you don't exist anymore because you've been supplanted by something else. Something else is taken over. Sounds like a terrible deal. Pariah says, I feel like your personality is defined as a template birth with your brain pattern and then further develops with neuroplasticity. Yeah, I don't know how much stock I put into like sun sign astrology, like the horoscope stuff, but there is something fascinating about it, I think, that might explain things. But again, with the concept of reincarnation, I don't know. I mean, it seems to be implied in so many of these esoteric traditions and systems, but the Gnostic concept is that this is a prison, and so why would you want to remain? But I'm not convinced that this place is in fact a prison. I mean, it has limitation inherent in it, but does that make it a prison? Well, not really. Every game you play implies restrictions, rules, limitations. That's what makes it a game. If somebody goes outside those rules, if they cheat, it's no longer fun. I mean, could this all be for fun? I don't know. It could be both. I mean, if this is some type of massive soul trap, I would say the architect is winning. The architect of this matrix, the demiurge, is winning because the number of souls is obviously going up. We've got 8 billion people. How do you explain that? If the system requires trapping souls, well, then it's catching new ones all the time, and more are reincarnating than opting out of it. Now, according to this Gnostic concept, the reason why people would be trapped here is that they are seduced by the world. They are tricked or conditioned into thinking that the world is all there is, their body is the extent of their being, and confusing their being with the physical matter is an automatic L, lose, you reincarnate. But that to win is simply a matter of obtaining knowledge about the fact that this isn't the entirety of the universe and you are not merely defined by your physical body. Plain Dakota says, just manifest your way out. Well, I kind of think it might also be somewhat predetermined. I mean, in this view, you had a group of people, a large segment, who are never going to leave because they're, and the NPC idea is sort of relates to this, the helix, which means their soul spark is so dim or they're so distant from it, they will never wake up. The other group are on the fence. It just depends on whether or not the world entices them over the sense of something bigger. And the third group, the pneumatics, are buoyant. They get out of jail free. They don't fall for the worldly systems, and the world itself doesn't hold such an appeal that they're going to lose sight of their soul spark. So the pneumatics are automatically getting out. Jamarian says, you think a human is mapped one-to-one with the soul? It's not true. One soul encompasses many human incarnates. So how does that work? Because I'm open to the idea that we have individuality, that we are independent nodes in this thing, but that the incorporeal aspect of the mind, the part of the mind that is not oriented simply from within the body, I would say that overlaps with the collective soul of a sort and the universe itself. I mean, that's kind of the idea of like icebergs in the ocean. Like, yeah, it's water, but it's frozen, so it's seemingly separate from the ocean itself. But that the tip of the iceberg is the part of ourselves that we interact with and with one another. But the majority of ourselves is actually unseen, even unrecognized. Otto Hookster GTFO says, when David Icke said Hillary was a reptilian, but Bill wasn't, it corresponded to the theory that reptilian meant. Oh, yeah, that's true, though. The conspiracy theories that David Icke has popularized were actually just recreations of the blood libel-based conspiracy theories, which get repackaged once in a while. There's nothing original about them. Rothschilds and even now, if you look at him on X, he's a typical woke writer. And one point I wanted to make earlier was that the red pill movement or the red pill conspiracy theories are actually a subset of J pill. So yeah, it's 100% woke right. So like if David Icke was to enter our Discord server, I would say, well, we don't tolerate Antifa, woke left, because their scapegoating narrative, which is based on blaming a group for a bunch of stuff that didn't actually happen. And then similarly, the woke right, you're also operating with this scapegoat and ascribing to this group a lot of crimes or attacks that didn't actually happen. So again, if you believe people die in psyops as a rule, you're still on the world stage. It's a controlled op thing. Jamarian says, any interesting stories from the shift? No, not really. I mean, I'm putting boxes on shelves. To me, it's just I just like being alone. And I think one of the reasons why I've opted to work for myself for so long has been I prefer to be alone. And so now I found a job where I'm alone for about 90% of the shift. So it's just like being at home, honestly. But instead of working on art, I'm listening to audiobooks and doing light physical labor. Although my health app says I'm doing, I think, about 10,000 steps a day, which is definitely a lot higher. So I'm more physically active, I think, than I've ever been because I'm always moving now. But as far as interesting stories, no, that's the beauty of it. It's predictable. It's mundane. Nothing ever changes. There's nothing interesting there. And I use my lunch breaks to read and write. I use my other breaks to read and write. And while I'm on shift, I'm listening to things or I'm actively plotting, developing the plan. So I'm getting paid to be alone. It's peaceful. And that's one thing I've always liked about working for this company, because the second time I have, is that they've so automated the management process that you don't really have to deal with any sort of interpersonal stuff. And I think it's by design as well, that at no point are you really like in proximity to another worker long enough to even engage in a conversation? Like everybody's in their own little sections. It's run very well, like a hive. And I was kind of thinking about this whole thing, about how perfect it is and how it's only going to get better. Like at some point, I do think AI is just going to make everything so efficient that it'll eliminate so many positions of control freaks. Micromanagement will be eliminated. I think a lot of positions are just going to be eliminated, and I don't think it's bad. People are like, oh, it's so bad. AI is taking our jobs. It's like, well, do you want to do that job? Wouldn't you rather outsource it? And there won't be like total unemployment. I mean, Elon Musk said in 10 years, nobody's going to have to work. But there are some things that they're still going to need real people for, like, I guess, plumbing. Yeah, Hive Mars is Venice. I remember the conspiracy theories that Walmarts were actually FEMA camps and there were underground tunnels connecting all the Walmarts, and that we were all going to be put in these underground trains and sent to Walmart forever or locked in. And I'm just remembering how that was the level of conspiracy theory that was popular like 20 years ago. Like the underground conspiracy theory was that Walmarts were secretly evil. And I had people would say, yeah, I've seen these big trucks pull up at night, these big semis with the eagle on it, and it represents the Nazi eagle. I've heard these conspiracy theories. They're not serious. They're cool stories. I'll give it that. I think there's a natural tendency that we have or need, which is built in. It's like intrinsic to the human experience that we sit around a campfire, we sit around, we tell stories, and we share information, myths, entertain. And I think that's always been a feature. I think that's how we've, I think that's just sort of part of this whole thing. And I think conspiracy theories kind of fill in for that. Like we're not gathered around campfires, we're in front of our glowing screens, but we're just entertaining each other. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with conspiratainment. I'm actually a fan of conspiratainment. I was a reader of the weekly World News tabloid. One of the reasons why I'm doing the Insider tabloid is that I've wanted to produce a tabloid for a long time. It's been a lifelong dream. And I love the weekly World News, but every time I'd be reading it, I would have these geniuses around me saying, that's all fake, right? I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm reading it. And even then I said, I can't tell if the real news is any faker, so I might as well read the more entertaining stuff. So I was into it because of its creativity, the bad Photoshop, and because it was just so creative. If you don't know, Weekly World News was not about celebrities. It was like the stories, like Bat Boy and stuff. I mean, a lot of it was ludicrous, but it was pretty damn funny. And unfortunately, they terminated the whole thing. They had a farewell episode, farewell issue, and they went online. But when it comes to tabloids, there was this book that came out. It was called "A Wild Hog Ate My Baby: The Rise and Fall of the American Tabloid," and it was predicting that mainstream news outlets were co-opting a lot of tabloid culture. Anything that was tabloid-esque, attention grabbing, it was actually being subsumed into the mainstream, and that this would bring about the downfall of tabloids as a separate entity in industry. And that's exactly what happened. So what we're going to do with the IPS Insider is we're bringing back weekly world news level of content. And a lot of the stuff I've been working on is in fact conspiratainment. There's conspiratainment news, which was an online tabloid that I started a while ago, and it was I described it as the first AI newspaper because it really was. I was using AI to write the stories. Conspiratainment. I don't have the website domain anymore. It was conspiratainment.blog. My point is, I'm not against conspiratainment. I'm totally in favor of it, but not in favor of confusing it with reality or as a serious attempt to describe reality, because that's not what it is. All right, let's continue through my Twitter feed. So the other night, was it last night? I was on Fakeologist, and some guy named Brian called in, and he was talking about buying ammunition and how pitchforks and torches need to be passed out, and the mobs need to be, aroused to go do some kind of action. And I didn't really respond to it then. Maybe I kind of did. I suggested that we're in no position right now to organize people because they're all essentially brainwashed. They're already working for the system. That it'd be futile. It would be like organizing people in an asylum. And even if you were able to overthrow the orderlies, they're not in a position to take over the institution itself. And that's where we are. Truthers are in no position to discern truth. They're simply an alternative to the mainstream entertainment. So that lack of seriousness is okay with me, but it has no part in what we're doing and what our mission here is. And that's why I was bringing up earlier. I'm just basically purging people from our circle if their interests are still mainstream or in any subset of that. And we're doing them a favor. It's not even rude. It's like, if your objective in life is to fight this manufactured fake enemy, if that gives you meaning, then go for it. But that's not what we're here for. Robert F. Kennedy cut off a raccoon's thing. Why is he always mutilating animals? Val Kilmer has been resurrected by AI to star in a new movie called As Deep as the Grave. So apparently his daughter said that he wanted this. He always looked at emerging technologies with optimism. This spirit is something that we're all honoring within this film. Watch the trailer here. Yeah, I'm not really interested in watching an AI version of Val Kilmer. Even if he approves of it. Okay, continuing. Candace Owens has repeatedly told her audience that Erica Kirk is a hybrid robot, not human, a sentinel machine, and that if you, quote, stab them, they wouldn't bleed. Again, this is kayfabe. Erica Kirk and Candace Owens are BFFs. They're besties and have been for years, and they're all friends with Charlie, who's not dead. And I've seen some channels, like there's a channel that's doing squib tests, like I was discussing, that we needed to do. And there are people who are talking about Charlie not being dead. None of them have figured out the big picture. None of them have taken the ball and moved it forward one bit, because they're still operating within this closed informational system. And again, when I say I'm purging, yeah, we're getting rid of woke right, woke left, but we're also purging anybody with the mainstream point of view. I mean, until they can correct it. And by correcting it, what we mean is you have to accept that you've been duped into thinking that not only are these events real, but that in psyops, even people who believe in psyops, some people will still say that people are dying. And if you're still stuck behind the notion that people are being killed in these events that we're deconstructing, you haven't left the funny farm. Pentagon accused of cover-up after failing to release UFO videos by deadline. That's how these things work. There's a conspiracy theory. If they can't prove it, or they'll say, well, they're covering it up. If they can't provide evidence, if they don't provide evidence, it's a cover-up. It's still a conspiracy. It's not that there's nothing there. So with the Epstein thing, it's sort of the same thing. The fact that they haven't released anything really damning is more evidence that there is a conspiracy. Okay, continuing. Representative Tim Burchett reveals the White House warned him the truth about UFOs and aliens is anti-Christian and will shake religion to its core. So is Representative Burchett, is he on the right? I want to see if this is consistent. Okay, United States Representative, a Republican. Because the idea that these things are demons is specifically a Republican thing. Anti-Christian, so aliens as anti-Christian. And as I said, the movie Project Hail Mary, about a guy named Grace on a spaceship becoming friends with a spider alien thing. That movie, its whole cast of characters, every bit about it is essentially connected to leftist views. Even his sensitivity to gender pronouns when talking to the alien caters to that. And I think what we were seeing in that movie was definitely representative of how the way aliens are packaged for the left is they're our friends. But if it was if the movie is about a scary or a demonic alien, then the right will, find it more compatible with their beliefs, their fears about the alien. And this is ultimately, I believe, tied into to the xenophobia programming, because you have these opposing views on how to look at the outsiders. Left loves aliens, extraterrestrial and terrestrial. Right fears both. Clockwork 113 says, I think it's more probable to think that the aliens could be below the surface of the Earth rather than up in the sky. It makes a lot more sense. Look, when I was thinking about NASA's big budget, because they get billions of dollars and they're giving us, crap films and bad special effects, like, where's the money going? Well, it's probably going to deep space. Not deep space as in way out there, but beneath the surface. And we have no way of knowing, but I'm pretty sure, based on what has been released, the capacity for underground infrastructure is vast. And there could very well be deep underground Mars bases. And so, like, I'm open to the idea that there's something below the world stage, that there's something beneath us. Maybe even bottom of the ocean. But regardless, I think that underground, the subterranean, would make more sense, even for the idea of extraterrestrials, obviously. If extraterrestrials are real and possibly alluded to in any of the myths, it's likely that they are out of sight, out of mind, or below. The pole of inaccessibility. This is like the place furthest remote from any human habitation. This is that place in the sea where in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Captain Nemo went. I think it was the pole of inaccessibility. Well, that's where NASA drops all of its dead satellites, the spacecraft cemetery, which, interestingly enough, is the same place where H.P. Lovecraft's aliens landed and where they have an underground city. Well, not underground, underwater city. The pole of inaccessibility. So you got H.P. Lovecraft, NASA, and Jules Verne, who was also part of the, I think, foreshadowing of the moon landing. But yeah, so Jules Verne, science fiction. H.P. Lovecraft, science fiction horror. And of course, NASA's Space Yard Cemetery, or satellite cemetery. And by the way, in Lovecraft's mythos, it wasn't a living city, it was actually a dead city. It was called the Dead But Dreaming, where it's actually a city of essentially ancient dead aliens who would be resurrected at some point in the future. Maybe not bodily, but by mentally projecting themselves into the minds of a certain segment of the population who had their DNA. So H.P. Lovecraft's stories were very much science fiction-y horror stories. But I just think it's interesting how you have this convergence of horror and sci-fi mixing with the space program. Jamarian says, check out Gears of War. New entry is coming soon called E-Day, Emergence Day. King Nirvana says Dagon. Yes, Dagon's a very good movie about Cthulhu. And who did that one? Was it Stan Winston on special effects? There's a really good Lovecraft adaptation that shows the whole story. Clockwork says, internet is predominantly ran through underwater cables and not by satellite based on the information they give us. Jamarian continues, 2 soldiers from the coalition of ordered governments must survive Emergence Day, in which a race of subterranean creatures known as Locust Horde emerges from the underground lair. Fascinating. So I had this science fiction premise. Actually, I do have a book on the subject, an ebook, but I want to expand it. And the idea was that we do have underground bases that seem like Mars bases. Because if you remember, there was that InfoWars guest who was former CIA, and he claimed that NASA was kidnapping children and that they were sending them on a 27-year, or was it sending them to Mars, but that there was essentially a slave colony on Mars. And of course, NASA responded to this. They said, we do not have any slave colonies on Mars. But it was kind of a weird thing for them to even comment on. Like, why would they even talk about, oh yeah, Stuart Gordon. That was the Spanish film. That was probably the best one. So if you haven't seen it, Dagon, Stuart Gordon, totally worth watching. Well, anyway, it was Robert David Steele. He said, children are being kidnapped, sent on a 20-year space ride, and forced to work on a slave colony on Mars. NASA's response? They officially denied the claim. Spokesman Guy Webster said, there's no humans on Mars. We have active rovers, but no humans. This claim arose among other claims such as Pizzagate. Yeah, that was, again, new conspiracy theory, children kidnapped for slavery on Mars. My point is, I consider that, well, maybe he's right. Maybe he was close enough or proximal to this operation to where he was hearing about it. But Mars is just a code. So they're not literally being taken to Mars. No, they're going to this underground base in China or wherever it is. And they're probably being sent there in a simulation, like that movie Orbiter 9, where a girl grows up in a spaceship and she's told Earth is dying and it's going to take 20 plus years to get to the nearest exoplanet. And so you've been sent in order to help continue the human race. And so she's growing up and she gets videos from her parents about how they were with her, but the calculation was they didn't have enough oxygen. So they had to actually send her by herself. So she grows up essentially alone in this ship, and occasionally the captain of a parallel ship will come in and talk to her. Well, later she finds out that she's actually in a simulated spaceship beneath Denver, and the captain helps her escape. I mean, it has a twist at the end. I won't give you a spoiler, but the idea here is simply that this was a contingency plan to make sure that we were able to go to these distant planets, and we had to have a segment of the population who were essentially brought up to live in what they called generational ships. So that kind of thinking, the idea of a simulation and testing to see, could man survive a 20-year trip to some exoplanet? That kind of experiment could very well be in effect, and we could in fact have Martians already on Earth. But these are, of course, humans conditioned to think that they are on Mars and possibly that the Earth was destroyed. I heard this NASA astronaut on 60 Minutes once talking about how he thought that maybe life started on Mars, but Mars was hit by a big space rock that destroyed the atmosphere. And that part of this process sent biomatter into the solar system and it rained down on Earth, which they call panspermia. And right after this conversation, there was a commercial for a show called Salvation about an asteroid coming to hit the Earth in 6 months. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Going through my Twitter feed. So yeah, the idea of the emergence, I thought, and this was the premise of the book though. So the premise of this book was that the slave colony on Mars thing was real, as I described, but that the Mars that they were going to was here on Earth. But moreover, that the Martian population, these children raised in captivity, were actually raised as killers, like Mars, the god of war. So in other words, another group of humans beneath the surface is being raised with a hatred for Earthlings because Earthlings are destroying the Earth, and that's why they had to be sent. And that the only way to save the Earth would be to take over the Earth. So the Martians taking over the Earth in this premise, in this story, are actually a group of humans brainwashed to think that they're Martians. And this idea of making Earth Mars like modeling Earth off of a better system that is tested on Mars first, is actually pretty old. There's a book from 1906 called Red Star about, and it's a Russian book, but it's about how Mars was a communist paradise. And the Earth scientist goes to Mars and realizes this is how Earth needs to be run. So he brings it back down to Earth. It's called Red Star, which, this all ties in. The red planet, red star, it also ties into the idea of the Aeon of Mars, the Aeon of Horus. Karai says, "You are the crew." Yeah, isn't that what the astronaut said? She said, "Earth is a spaceship and we are the crew." Spaceship Earth, I think that's actually a L. Ron Hubbard concept. Spaceship Earth is also a 16-minute ride located in the geodesic sphere at Walt Disney in Florida. Well, there's also Earthship here in New Mexico, which is some kind of sustainable living habitat. Earthship. We talked about Space Cadets, the 10-episode TV show, kind of a hoax, where a group of people think they're going to space, but they're just going into a simulated spacecraft that convincingly puts them in low Earth orbit. And the reason they fall for it is that half the crew are actors who prevent the non-actors from corroborating and maybe even having a conspiracy that maybe it's all fake. Their conspiracy theory they could have come up with it. Like conspiracy theorists start talking and they come to certain conclusions. Well, they didn't want the 5 contestants or the 5 dupes to think that maybe it was fake. So they used the actors to keep them from putting 2 and 2 together. But at the very end, they open the doors and they find out that they're in an aircraft hangar and they never actually left the Earth. So it's this big reveal, and the audience laughs at them. I'm like, so the audience is laughing because these actors, these reality TV show contestants, thought they were going into space, and so it was a big joke. But I'm like, it's kind of ironic because, in a way, the people laughing at them are themselves space cadets. They've been put into a simulation. And similarly, we're kept in the simulation by having these intermediaries, these propagandists, actors, influencers, whose job it is to keep the people who are the targets of the deception from putting all the pieces together. Jamarian says the Earth is a closed biodome system. We live in a yellow submarine. But how would you prove that? Like, so even the word dome, if it's a dome, is it curved? What's the curvature of the dome? Is the sky flat? I would like to ask the dome expert on this, Mark Sargent. Is the sky flat? If the Earth is flat, why wouldn't the sky be? If it's a dome, is it higher in the middle? Is it touching the ground at a certain southern latitude in the so there's significant questions. I would also be curious to know what he thinks about the 33-mile circumference black magnetic rock in the middle of the North Pole. This is where it's at, says Tim. You got to check out Jury Duty, a show about a fake trial and one juror thinks it's real. The entire court case is full of actors. Right. That sounds about like what we're talking about here. Because there is an element of not force necessarily, but numbers, like consensus driving things. And that is kind of how it works. The consensus really decides whether or not what we've been presented with is real. And even if you're outside of it, you see through it, you're drowned out. You can't shout out, you can't shout down, you can't overshadow the consensus. It always dominates. There is a numbers thing that we have to recognize here. And that's why I think it's worth leaving Trutherville altogether, because you will never be in any way competitive with their numbers. They've got the numbers to essentially dominate every conversation and drown out anyone who might have a conflicting opinion. Okay, let's see here. I'll go through the comments really quick. We'll be live tomorrow, a little bit earlier. I have a number of projects I'm working on. We'll be back in Discord tonight, trying to update the website. So I have a few things to take care of, but we'll be on a more regular schedule as I get settled into the new headquarters, hopefully within the next week or so. We'll say thanks for your comments. I'll be in Discord tonight. We're going to actually jump into voice chat. So if you're not in Discord, go to ips.monster, click the link, and the Discord chat will be active starting in about 10 minutes. So I'll see you in Discord. Otherwise, we'll be live tomorrow